My mother disappeared the year I was 12 years old. No one knew the reason. 20 years later, I received a letter saying, "Mother never abandoned you." I returned to my hometown on an early winter morning, when the fog still covered the surface of the national highway, the eucalyptus trees along the road standing still as if eavesdropping on the secret thoughts of passers-by. The bus stopped at the old market intersection, where long ago my mother used to hold my hand to cross every morning to catch the early market session. Now the shops had changed owners. The street vendors were gone. Only a faded sign hung crookedly on a utility pole, like an old person who had forgotten they were once young. I stood there for a long time, not because of nostalgia, but because I was weighing whether I was doing something foolish, returning to hold the 20th memorial for a mother no one dared to be sure was still alive or already gone. My mother disappeared on a winter day when I was 12 years old. No message, no trace. My father reported it to the police. They searched for a week and then stopped. My father remarried very quickly afterward, as if the void my mother left behind wasn't worth preserving beyond one memorial season. I didn't blame him. Back then, I only knew I grew quieter each day. The questions, "Where's mother?" gradually turned into, "Will mother come back?" Then, growing up, I learned to stop asking. But I never stopped waiting. I had lived for over 20 years with that silence, a wound that didn't bleed but was enough to make all my emotions cautious. I didn't love anyone for long, didn't stay anywhere for more than 3 years, didn't fully trust in beautiful things. People called me reserved. I called myself someone who learned not to hope. Yet, paradoxically, this return, I prepared as if my mother would come back. I cooked the dishes my mother used to like: sweet mustard green soup with dried shrimp, pork paste with beetle leaves, and black bean sweet soup with little sugar. I personally cleaned the altar, chose to buy white lilies, the flower my mother used to place by the window every Sunday morning. And I wrote a letter to my mother, a handwritten letter, written in purple ink, the kind of ink she used when she was still an elementary school teacher. "Mother, I don't know if you can still read these lines, but I miss you. Still miss you like the last day you tied a scarf for me to go to school, kissed my forehead, and said, 'Be good today, I'll buy green bean cakes for you.' You didn't come back, but I was good. For 20 years. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an indigo envelope, the slightly rough paper she used to prefer. I knew it might never be read, but it made me feel I wasn't alone in missing her. That afternoon, as I was lighting the first incense stick on my mother's altar, a letter slipped through the door crack. No sender's name, no address, only a neatly written line. For the one who still remembers. I opened it. Inside was a sheet of paper folded in 3, handwritten, in a script so familiar it choked me. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't come back. But I never abandoned you. Go to the old ferry dock on the 3rd of the 12th lunar month. Someone is waiting for you." I sat stunned. The letter lay in my hand, trembling slightly. The word "mother" wasn't written, but I knew it deep in my chest. That winter, I waited for my mother again. But this time, it was to understand, not to cling. The old ferry dock lay west of the Ma River, nearly 10 kilometers from my house. The place no longer operated. A concrete bridge had replaced it, and people no longer had to wait for slow ferries to cross the river each early morning. But to me, it was a sacred place, where my mother used to take me to watch the sunrise on quiet summer mornings. On the 3rd of the 12th lunar month, I woke up very early, put on a thick jacket, tucked the letter into my chest pocket, and walked. I wanted to feel each step on the old road, as if tracing the memories my mother left behind. At the ferry dock, I saw an old woman sitting by an ancient banyan tree. In her hand was a patched cloth bag, her eyes deep as if she had lived through many lifetimes. When I approached, she looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Is your name Her voice was soft like the rustling wind. I nodded. She rummaged in her bag, pulled out an old wooden box, dark brown. "Your mother left this. I've kept it for nearly 20 years. I don't know what's inside." But she was clear. Give it to her directly, when she's old enough to understand without resentment. I took the box with both hands. My hands shook, not from the cold. The box was lighter than I expected, but when I opened it, the old world began to crack. Inside was a small notebook and a yellowed letter. I picked up the letter first. The paper was brittle, the handwriting slanted, unmistakably my mother's. "Dear my love, if you're reading this, I've probably gone too far to return. I'm sorry. I'm sorry not for leaving, but for not being able to take you with me. Back then, I had no other choice. I had lived like a shadow in my own home, when every decision no longer belonged to me, when love turned into duty and duty turned into chains. I once thought I'd stay for you, but then I realized, if I stayed, I'd teach you to endure instead of living freely. And I couldn't let you grow up with the image of a mother who always bowed her head, always stayed silent, always waited for her husband to decide, even her sleep. I had to stop. My chest tightened, hard to breathe. I never knew my mother had suffered so much. In my memory, she was always gentle, always smiling, though her eyes were often red at night. At the end of the letter, she wrote, "I don't dare ask for your forgiveness. I only hope one day, when you're old enough, you'll understand, some departures aren't because of a lack of love, but because of loving too much to stay." I read and reread the old letter many times that night. Each reading made my heart heavier, as if in every line, my mother had packed a part of the life she never got to share. The accompanying notebook was also in her handwriting. Not long, just about 30 pages, fragmented entries like a diary, but enough for me to understand her silent retreat from a cold marriage. One passage made me freeze. The day he started leaving early and returning late, I suspected. But when I was pregnant the second time, he said, "Having another child now, who'll raise it?" I stayed silent. At the clinic, I didn't think I'd go through with it. But when I woke up, the fetus was gone, and he was smoking in the hallway as if nothing happened. My mother lost her second child like that. And I, the remaining child, was only 8 then, only knowing she often stood staring out the window, so long I thought she was waiting for something out of reach. The next morning, I returned to our old house, where my father and his new wife still lived. They didn't know I was back. I stood before the rusted iron gate, holding my mother's letter. I didn't plan to show it to anyone. I just wanted to stand there once, to look back at the place that was once a home, and the place that pushed my mother out of this world. I didn't knock. I stood silently for a few minutes, then turned away. Some questions don't need to be spoken, and some forgiveness doesn't need the other person to realize. Back in the city, I placed what my mother left behind in another wooden box, sturdier, more beautiful. I put it on the bookshelf, among my favorite novels and poetry collections. That night, I opened my laptop and began typing the first lines. I once had a mother who disappeared in the winter. But in truth, she didn't disappear. She only left to become human. I wrote as if talking to her. No edits. No constraints. Just a story, simple and honest. Like the way my mother lived her quiet, proud life. 2 months later, my first draft was done. I sent it to a small publisher, not expecting much. But the editor called back after just a week. She said, her voice slightly hoarse with emotion, "We want to publish it. And I think many people will need to read this story." I stayed silent. Not because I wasn't happy, but because a part of me, the child who waited for her mother for 20 years, had finally found an answer to that silence. The book was published under the pen name HT, a vague name, not enough to identify, but not hiding either. I didn't promote it on social media, didn't send it to friends, didn't mention it to family. I just quietly printed it and let it exist, like a faint trace of my mother's scent in my memory. Surprisingly, the book sold quite well. A few online news sites wrote reviews. Some called it a whisper about forgotten mothers. Others said the story is too real, painful in a gentle way. I read those comments, my heart unsure whether it felt warm or cold. I only knew each reader saw the shadow of someone they once loved, but could no longer hold. One late weekend afternoon, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. "Father read it. Wants to meet you." I stared at the screen for a long time. Didn't reply. Didn't delete. Just left it there like a door not fully closed, but not inviting either. That evening, I walked back to my old apartment, stopping by the small bookstore on the street corner where my mother used to buy Russian literature. On the shelf, among hardcover books, my book sat humbly yet striking. White cover, a falling petal, and a title, just one line. No Winter When Mother Doesn't Return. I stood there a long time, not to admire the book, but as if waiting for my mother to appear, smile, and say, "You wrote beautifully." But of course, she didn't come. She didn't need to, because she was already here, in every word. I began changing small things in my life. Planting trees on the balcony, doing morning yoga, cutting back on coffee, rereading the books my mother loved. I wrote more regularly, not to publish, but to breathe. Each page was an inhale, each line a lullaby. I didn't visit my hometown often anymore, but every winter, I lit an incense stick by the river at the old ferry dock, not hoping for her return, just a greeting, gentle, unbinding. Once, at an author's talk in Hanoi, an older woman approached me after the book signing. She said nothing, just handed me a small note. "Thank you for writing for those without a voice." I'm one of them. I nodded, didn't ask more, because I understood people like my mother, like her, didn't need saving. They just needed to be heard, to be believed that they once existed. That morning, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject was just 3 words. "It's Mother here." I opened it. The email contained nothing but a short paragraph. "I don't know if I still have the right to write to you, but if you're still reading, I want to say thank you for keeping me alive with such gentle words. I never thought I'd live again, through your voice." No signature, no reply address, but I knew. It was Ms. Tan, the woman who kept the wooden box years ago, the one who promised my mother to deliver everything to me at the right time. Perhaps she read the book. Perhaps she wanted my mother, though gone, to send one final word. I didn't reply, just saved the email, started. Like a trace of someone who quietly stood behind the light, bridging 2 generations of silent women. A few weeks later, I got a call from my father's number. I didn't pick up, but this time he left a voicemail. "Father read it. Didn't expect you to remember so vividly. Some things indeed I shouldn't have forgotten. If you're ever free, come home for a meal. No need to talk. Just eat." I listened, unsure whether to feel sad or smile. For the first time, my father called not to command, not to deny, but to ask for a quiet coexistence. I hadn't decided anything, but for the first time, my heart didn't ripple when I heard his voice. On social media, some guessed the protagonist in the book was me. A few old classmates messaged to check in. Some relatives sent condolences, even apologies for their indifference back then. I wasn't angry at anyone. Those years, everyone had their own reasons for silence. No one wanted to be the betrayer in a family slowly rotting. I was like that too. Now, they read and cried. And that was enough. One Sunday afternoon, while sipping tea on the balcony, I got a short message from a cousin. "I once wanted to run away too. But after reading your book, I understood. Leaving isn't wrong. What's wrong is when you no longer know why you stay." I put the phone down, looked up at the pale gray sky. No sun, no rain, but bright enough to see everything clearly. Perhaps, in the end, that book didn't just preserve my mother's shadow. It also helped others, silently enduring, let out a soft sigh. Light, but real. The last month of winter, Hanoi turned cold quickly. Gusts of northern wind slipped through every door crack, carrying the smell of coal smoke and moisture clinging to glass. I hung my coat on the hook, brewed a cup of lotus tea, and sat at my desk as usual. But today, I didn't write. I just sat there, looking at the books on the shelf, my eyes resting on the small wooden box, where I kept the mementos my mother left behind. I opened the lid. The smell of old paper lingered. The letter, the notebook, the handkerchief embroidered with H. All lay still, as if they hadn't stirred a life. I didn't cry. I just placed my hand on the handkerchief and smiled softly. "I'm okay now, Mother." I decided to donate all the royalties from the book to an organization supporting single mothers in my mother's hometown. Not to do something grand, but just a small way for my mother to keep existing through women like her. One afternoon, I received a thank you letter from them. The last line made my throat tighten. "The old mothers will always be grateful for the child who still remembers." I printed that line, taped it to the inside of the cabinet where I kept tea. So every morning, when I opened it, I'd remember. Some memories don't need to be forgotten to move on. They're there, like the foundation stones of my soul's house. On a New Year's Day, I returned to the old ferry dock. The river was as calm as ever, only now no one waited for the ferry. I brought a bouquet of white lilies and a glass jar filled with small notes. Excerpts from my mother's letter, words she once said, things I didn't get to thank her for. I let the jar float down the river, hoping the water would carry it far. Not to forget, but to return. Then I stood there a long time, until my shadow blended into the dusk. Life doesn't change with loud moments. It shifts quietly, like when we stop forcing ourselves to live up to someone else's expectations. I no longer wrote about my mother, but everything I wrote had her in it. In the way a character knows when to stay silent, in the way a woman chooses to leave, in the eyes of a child still holding hope. And I knew, in the end, I belonged to myself. No longer the shadow of a longing. No longer living just to be seen. I was me, with all I'd lost, kept, and learned. That evening, I lit an incense stick on the balcony, not for anyone, not to anyone. Just a greeting sent into the wind. Thank you, Mother, for daring to leave. Because of that, I learned how to stay. I poured tea, sat quietly under the soft yellow light. No one needed to call. No one needed to knock. Just me. And enough. A month after I let the jar float down the river, I received a nameless parcel at my office. Small, wrapped in old newspaper, no sender's address, just neat handwriting in the top corner. For the one who told the stories no one dared to speak. Inside was a faded black and white photo, my mother, standing at the ferry dock, holding a newborn baby. I froze. The photo was clearly taken after my mother left our family. The woman was unmistakably her, no doubt. But who was the baby? I flipped the photo over. A line written in blue ink. Her name was Hien. She didn't live long. But at least, I had her for one spring. My hands shook uncontrollably. In an instant, all my old assumptions collapsed. My mother didn't just leave, didn't just escape. She had given birth to another child. A baby I never knew existed. A piece of memory erased. I reopened the notebook my mother left behind. Some pages had been torn out. Back then, I thought she wrote incompletely. Now I understood. She hid. That evening, I called Ms. Tan, the woman who kept the wooden box years ago. For the first time in years, she answered directly. You found out, haven't you? I didn't respond. Just asked. Why didn't she ever tell me? She was silent for a long time. Then said, because she didn't want you to live with the obsession that you'd been replaced. But in truth, Hien didn't replace anyone. She was just a final attempt for your mother to be a mother, in her own way. I heard the wind through the phone, as if a river somewhere was sighing on the other end. Hien died before she was one, she added. Unknown illness, but I think she never got over it. I sat by the window all night. In my mind, two images blended. My mother holding me, then my mother holding Hien. I wasn't jealous, not angry, just felt an aching love for her. Everyone has pains they don't share. My mother was no exception. She lost a child, a piece of her past, and a chance for forgiveness. I wrote, Hien, on a small piece of paper, folded it, placed it next to the handkerchief embroidered with H. From now on, I wouldn't just remember one person. I began dreaming of my mother, but not the mother from my childhood. A stranger, short hair to her shoulders, wearing a dark sweater, standing with her back to me in a field of reeds. The sky was dark, no wind. Everything froze in a moment of nameless sadness. I called out to her. She didn't turn, but I knew, with the deepest instinct, it was her. And beside her, silent as a shadow, was a toddler clinging to her hem. She didn't cry, just looked at me for a long time with wide, questioning eyes. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, cold sweat soaking my back. In the dark, I listened to my own breathing, as if trying to distinguish my heartbeat from the sound of someone once forgotten. The next morning, I went out early. The sky wasn't fully light. I visited the old cemetery south of the city, where nameless graves crowded among green moss and cold stones. I didn't know if Hien was buried here, but I brought a bouquet of white daisies, a child's bracelet, and a pebble my mother once picked from a stream to make a toy for me. I placed them at the base of an old tree, where the light just barely filtered through the leaves. No need for a headstone. No need for a name. Just a place to remember. If you ever lived, know this. You're not forgotten. That evening, I got a message from my father's number. Brief. Your mother died that year. I didn't know she was pregnant again. If I had, maybe I'd have found another way. But I understand if you never forgive me. I read it, then deleted it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't want anyone in this story to keep apologizing. Some things can't be fixed, but they can be left in peace. That night, I went to the balcony. The air was so still I couldn't hear cars, wind, or the city's breath. I sat there until late, the yellow light from the apartment across flickering like a signal from a story that never fully stopped. I didn't know how long I sat. Only that, in that windless night, I no longer felt cold. And for the first time, I didn't need a dream to meet my mother again. A few weeks after that night, I tidied the bookshelf where I kept my mother's small wooden box. This time, I opened it with the ease of someone ready, no longer expecting hidden truths, just wanting to look at the past like old photos. But when I lifted the handkerchief embroidered with H, I noticed the box's lining seemed slightly loose. Beneath the fabric was a small, discreet compartment, so hidden that for 20 years no one had noticed. I froze. Inside was a photo and an old cassette tape. I took the tape to an antique shop. A kind old man on Hong Bong Street agreed to play it on an old cassette player he kept for himself. When the tape ran, a crackling sound filled the air. Then a familiar voice, slightly hoarse, hesitant. "Ah, if you're listening to this, it means I no longer have the chance to speak to you directly. I left nothing behind but love, and the things you need to know to live without carrying the burdens I once did." I sat stunned, my hand on the player, trembling slightly. My mother's voice continued. "You don't need to forgive anyone. Don't need to protect anyone. Just love yourself, as fiercely as you've always been, from the moment you were born on a rainy spring day. You cried so loudly then, and I thought, this boy won't let life bully him. So, if you ever have to leave anyone, do it. But never leave yourself." I don't remember when I started crying, only that when the recording ended, the old man looked at me for a long time, then quietly turned away. In his eyes was something like empathy, as if he too had lost someone he couldn't name. I took the tape, thanked him, and walked along the street as evening fell. The city that day was strangely peaceful. No horns, no rush, as if the whole space was listening too. That night, I placed the wooden box back on the shelf. But this time, I added a handwritten note. "Whoever finds this box, if I'm gone, please know, it holds things more alive than the sender." And then I went to bed early. No dreams, no anticipation. Because in the end, what my mother left wasn't an answer. It was a wish to keep going. March, Hanoi's sky brightened after weeks of gloom. I opened all the windows in my small apartment, letting light flood in, chasing away the lingering dampness of winter. The sunlight was gentle, pale gold, spilling over the desk, the wooden floor, and the shelf where the wooden box sat quietly. I brewed a cup of jasmine tea, reopened my old draft. For the first time in months, I wanted to write again, not about my mother, but about me, about the journey after the ending, about how someone still lives, even after losing what seemed most essential. A publisher invited me to a talk on the theme, Writing to Heal. I hesitated, then agreed. Not to retell old stories, but to listen and see how many others had to write to hold on to themselves. The event was more crowded than I expected. Many unfamiliar faces. Some held my book, others sat quietly at the back. When I spoke about the dream of my mother in the reed field, someone shed tears. I didn't elaborate, just said one thing. We don't need to forgive to move on. We just need to stop waiting for an explanation. And the whole room fell silent, as if March had just touched every breath. After the talk, a young girl approached me. She held an old letter in her hand. "Brother Ha," she said. "I found a letter my mother wrote when she left, but I'm scared to read it. Do you think, sometimes, not reading hurts less?" I looked at her for a long time, then answered, "Not reading does hurt less, but it also means you leave the pain in the dark, and anything left in the dark too long will, one day, find its way out." She nodded. Her eyes were red. Then she took the letter and left. I don't know if she read it, but I believe, when the time comes, we'll find the courage. I got home as night fell. On the desk, the yellow lamplight shone on an unfinished blank page. I wrote one line, not to end, but to remember. I've walked through a very long winter, but in the end, March has sunlight too. I put the pen down, looked out the window. There, the city still breathed. And so did I. A month after the talk, I received a small parcel. The sender left no name. The address only read, "At the end of the slope." Inside was a handwritten sheet of music, titled, "Slow Down, My Love." I didn't know who sent it, but the slanted handwriting made me think of my mother. Maybe someone who knew her. Or maybe the universe's way of returning what she couldn't leave behind. The music had no lyrics, but the melody was written in simple notes, slow, as if each sound was a gentle step on the journey back to oneself. I asked a musician friend to transcribe it and record it on piano. That evening, I played the music, turned off all the lights, and let myself drift with each low note. No words, no images. But when the music ended, I cried, not from sadness, but from feeling myself becoming gentle again. I started writing again. Not stories, not memoirs, but scattered notes about brewing tea, about people I met on the road, about morning sunlight on the balcony. Things so small they seemed unworthy of keeping. But then I realized that was life. Because after all the winners, the fractures, the nameless losses, the only thing left isn't an answer. It's the ability to feel a slow melody on an unremarkable day. If someone ever asks me, "Have you forgiven?" I'll answer, "I'm not sure. But I've stopped waiting for an apology." And if they ask, "Do you still love your mother?" I'll smile lightly and say, "I do, but now I don't need her to return to prove it." My second book didn't mention my mother's name. But in the stories about life, friendship, kindness, and loneliness, there's still a faint trace of a woman who left, so her child could learn to stay. One Saturday morning, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject simply, "I once knew your mother." The content was brief. The sender was an old classmate of my mother's from Teachers College, now living in Delat. She read my book, recognized familiar details, and wanted to send back a memento my mother left behind on her last visit to Delat. The email ended, "If you don't want to receive it, I'll keep it. But I think this scarf has waited long enough to return to the right person." A week later, the parcel arrived. Inside was a deep red knitted scarf, old but still neatly folded, and a small note attached. "This scarf your mother knitted when she knew she'd be a mother again. Never used, but she kept it, because in those tight stitches was an entire spring that didn't get to bloom." I held the scarf, pressed it to my cheek. The wool was coarse, the smell of time distinct. And suddenly, I felt my heart was no longer an empty space, but a field where seeds had been sown, quietly and patiently. That evening, I took the scarf to the balcony. The air was lightly chilly, but not biting. I wrapped it around my neck, brewed a pot of tea, and played "Slow Down, My Love." The sound rose, weaving into the wind, my hair, my warming hands in the old wool. I closed my eyes. Didn't see my mother. Didn't see Hien. But I saw myself, a fuller, more complete version, sitting there, at peace among things never named. Maybe we never truly heal. We just learn to live with the scars. And sometimes, an old scarf or a message from silence is enough to know we're still moving forward.